Right now, sitting in a regular bank account somewhere, there is money that should be earning 4 to 5% a year, and instead is earning almost nothing at all. The national average savings rate as of June 2026 is 0.38%. The best high-yield accounts right now are paying up to 5%. That gap on just $20,000 sitting idle costs you close to $900 every single year completely silently, with zero effort required to fix it. In the last video, we talked about Warren Buffett sitting on $4 billion in cash, building what Abel calls a fortress balance sheet. Today, I am going to show you exactly how to build your own version of that fortress, at whatever scale your life actually requires. This is not about having billions. This is about having a structure. A system that means you are never the person forced to sell investments at the worst possible moment because real life threw an emergency at you. Let me start with the foundation, because everything else we discussed today depends entirely on getting this first piece right. The first layer of your fortress balance sheet is your emergency fund, and almost everyone, including people who consider themselves financially literate, gets the sizing of this wrong. The standard guidance is 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses. Notice the word essential. This means rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, minimum debt payments, health insurance, and transportation to work. It does not include dining out, entertainment, subscriptions, or any other discretionary spending you could cut if you genuinely needed to. Calculate your essential expenses honestly, multiply by 3 for a minimum baseline, multiply by 6 if your income is variable or your job security feels uncertain right now in 2026. Here is a concrete example, so this is not abstract. If your essential monthly expenses come out to $3,000, Fortress Foundation should be somewhere between $9,000 and $18,000, completely separate from your investments. Now here's where most people make their first real mistake, and it is costing them real money every single month without them even realizing it. They put that emergency fund into a regular savings account at their main bank, earning 0.38%, the current national average as of mid-2026. That same money, sitting in a high-yield savings account, could be earning between 4 and 5% right now, completely risk-free, fully insured, fully liquid. Let me show you the actual dollar difference, because numbers like this only matter once you see the real impact on your life. On a $20,000 emergency fund, the difference between 0.38% and 4.20% is approximately $764 a year. On a $30,000 fund, that gap grows to over $140 annually, year after year, for doing absolutely nothing except choosing a different account. This is not investment risk. This is not market timing. This is simply correcting an obvious inefficiency that costs millions of people thousands of dollars over their lifetime for no reason at all. As of June 2026, the Federal Reserve has held its benchmark rate steady at 3.50 to 3.75% for 4 consecutive meetings, with new Fed Chair Kevin Warsh citing persistent inflation concerns as the reason for holding steady. This matters because high-yield savings rates generally track the Fed's policy rate. For now, in mid-2026, rates above 4% remain widely available, though most forecasts suggest a gradual decline if the Fed eventually begins cutting later this year. The lesson here is simple: open the account now while the rate is still attractive, rather than waiting and losing months of higher yield. Let me walk you through what to actually look for when choosing where to put this money, because not all high-yield accounts are created equal, and the advertised rate is only one part of the decision. First, check for direct deposit requirements. Some accounts advertise their highest rate only if you set up direct payroll deposit, and the rate drops dramatically if you do not. One major account drops from 4.50% down to just 1.20% without qualifying direct deposit, which makes it a poor fit if you are self-employed or have irregular income. Second, check for balance caps. Some accounts only pay their advertised top rate up to a certain balance, sometimes as low as $5,000, with everything above that earning a much lower rate. Third, check for fees. The best accounts in 2026 charge no monthly maintenance fees and require no minimum balance to avoid being charged, but some smaller institutions still try to sneak these in. Fourth, and this is the one people forget, check how fast you can actually access your money. External transfers between banks typically take 1 to 3 business days to complete. If your car breaks down on a Friday afternoon, you may not see those funds until the following Tuesday. This is why I recommend a practical structure rather than putting all your emergency fund in a single distant account. Keep $500 to $1,000 in your regular checking account as an immediate buffer for genuine same-day emergencies. Keep the remainder, the bulk of your fund, in a high-yield account, ideally one linked to the same bank as your checking account so internal transfers happen instantly rather than taking days. If a true emergency hits before your high-yield transfer arrives, a credit card paid off in full once the transfer completes works as a temporary bridge with zero interest cost. This is exactly the kind of unglamorous, boring logistical planning that nobody puts on a YouTube thumbnail, but it is precisely what separates people who handle emergencies calmly from people who panic and make expensive decisions under pressure. Now let me move to the second layer of the fortress, because the emergency fund alone is not the complete structure that Buffett's philosophy is built on. The second layer is what I call dry powder, and this is the piece most personal finance content skips entirely. Dry powder is not your emergency fund. It is a separate pool of cash, sitting outside your day-to-day investments, specifically reserved for buying opportunities when markets become genuinely fearful. Remember from the last video, Berkshire currently holds $4 billion in cash, representing approximately 59% of its total investable portfolio. You do not need anywhere close to that percentage, but the principle scales perfectly to any portfolio size. Here is a simple framework you can actually apply starting this week. If your investment portfolio is currently 100, consider keeping 5 to 10% of that, so 5 in cash specifically earmarked as dry powder rather than fully invested. This is money you deliberately choose not to deploy during calm or euphoric markets, precisely so you have it available when fear eventually creates genuine discounts. I want to be very clear about something important here because this concept gets misused constantly in finance content. This is not about timing the market. This is not about predicting when the next crash arrives. You are not trying to call the bottom. You are simply ensuring that when the bottom eventually does arrive, whenever that is, you are not structurally prevented from taking advantage of it because every available dollar is already deployed. This dry powder should also live in a high-yield savings account or in short-term treasury holdings, earning that same 4 to 5% we discussed earlier, rather than sitting in a brokerage account earning nothing while it waits. This means your dry powder is not dead money. It is working money, quietly earning a real return while remaining fully available the moment a genuine opportunity appears. Let me give you a real historical example of why this two-layer structure, emergency fund plus dry powder, performs so differently from having no cash reserve at all. During the COVID crash, in March 2020, the S&P 500 fell 34% in approximately 5 weeks, one of the fastest declines in market history. Someone with zero cash reserve and zero emergency fund, who experienced a job loss or unexpected expense during that exact window, was often forced to sell investments at the absolute bottom simply to cover basic living costs. Someone with a proper emergency fund never had to touch their investments at all during that crash, regardless of what happened in their personal life. And someone with dry powder on top of that emergency fund was able to buy additional shares at prices that would not be seen again for years, turning the crisis into one of the best buying opportunities of the entire decade. Same crash. Same 5 weeks. 3 completely different financial outcomes, determined entirely by the structure that was built years before the crisis ever began. Now let me address the third and final layer of the fortress balance sheet, because this one is more about behavior than about a specific account or dollar amount. The third layer is what I call structural debt discipline, and it is the piece that quietly undermines everything else if it is ignored. Having a large emergency fund and dry powder reserve means very little if you are simultaneously carrying high-interest consumer debt that is growing faster than your cash is earning interest. If you are carrying credit card debt at 22 or 24% interest while your savings account earns 4%, you are losing the math badly, no matter how well structured your cash reserves appear on paper. The Fortress Balance Sheet framework prioritizes in this specific order. First, build a small starter emergency fund of around $1,000 for genuine immediate emergencies. Second, aggressively pay down any high-interest debt above roughly 7 to 8%, since no savings account in 2026 is going to out-earn that cost. Third, once high-interest debt is cleared, build your full 3 to 6 month emergency fund using the high-yield accounts we discussed. Fourth, once the emergency fund is complete, begin building your dry powder reserve alongside your regular investment contributions. This order matters enormously because building a large cash reserve while still carrying 24% credit card debt is mathematically backwards, even though it might feel emotionally safer in the short term. Let me bring this back to Buffett's own example one more time, because the parallel here is genuinely instructive for how you should think about your own structure. Berkshire Hathaway carries remarkably little debt relative to its size, specifically because Buffett has always prioritized financial flexibility over leverage. He has said many times that he never wants Berkshire to be in a position where it is forced to sell good assets at bad prices simply because debt obligations demand it. Your personal version of this principle is exactly the same. Low debt plus adequate cash reserves equals optionality. High debt plus no cash reserves equals fragility, regardless of how much you have invested in the market on paper. Let me now put real numbers to the complete framework so you can see exactly what building this looks like in practice, using a realistic example based on an average household income in 2026. Imagine a household with $5,000 in essential monthly expenses and $50,000 currently invested in the market. Step 1. Starter emergency fund of $1,000 in a checking account buffer, achievable within the first month or two of focused saving. Step 2. If there is high interest debt, focus entirely on eliminating it before building further cash reserves, since this typically represents the highest guaranteed return available anywhere in your financial life. Step 3. Build the full emergency fund to between 15,000,000, representing 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, held in a high-yield account earning around 4.20% as of mid-2026. At a realistic savings rate of $500 a month directed specifically toward this goal, reaching the 15,000 minimum takes approximately 30 months, or about 2.5 years, assuming no setbacks. Step 4. Once that emergency fund is fully built, begin directing 5 to 10% of new investment contributions toward dry powder instead of being fully deployed into the market every single month. On a 50,000 portfolio, this might mean keeping 500 to 5,000 rather than 100% invested at all times. I know this entire process sounds slow, methodical, and frankly a little boring compared to most finance content you have probably consumed. That is precisely the point, and it connects directly back to everything we discussed about Buffett in the previous video. The fortress balance sheet is not built during a single dramatic moment. It is built quietly, month after month, year after year, specifically so that when a dramatic moment eventually arrives, you are not the one scrambling. Let me address one more practical question that comes up constantly when people start building this structure, because it is genuinely important and rarely addressed clearly. Should your dry powder be in cash, or should some of it be in short-term treasury bills or treasury bonds instead, given that treasuries currently offer comparable yields with the full backing of the US government? For most people, a high-yield savings account is simpler and sufficiently safe, with FDIC insurance covering deposits up to $250,000 account, and some accounts now offering expanded coverage up to $1 to $3 million through partner bank programs. If your dry powder reserve grows large enough that you want additional diversification beyond a single bank, short-term treasury bills purchased directly through Treasury Direct or held within a brokerage account become a reasonable complement, offering similar liquidity with government backing rather than FDIC insurance. For the vast majority of people building this fortress for the first time, simplicity wins, and a well-chosen high-yield savings account is more than sufficient for both the emergency fund layer and the dry powder layer. Now, I want to close with the psychological piece of this entire framework, because building the accounts themselves is actually the easy part. The hard part is resisting two very different, but equally powerful temptations over the years that follow. The first temptation arrives during calm, rising markets, when everything feels safe and exciting, and you start to wonder whether keeping money in cash earning 4% is actually a waste when the market is returning 12 or 15% that particular year. This is exactly the moment Buffett has spent 6 decades training himself to resist, and it is exactly the moment that determines whether your fortress will actually be there when you eventually need it. The second temptation arrives during the crisis itself, when your dry powder is finally available to deploy, and every emotional signal in your body is screaming at you that this is the worst possible time to buy anything at all. This is the moment the entire structure was built for, and it is also, paradoxically, the moment it feels most wrong to actually use it. Buffett bought Goldman Sachs in September 2008, while the market continued falling for another 6 months afterward. He looked wrong for half a year before being proven right. Your fortress balance sheet exists precisely so you can tolerate that exact discomfort without being forced into a decision by circumstances beyond your control. Let me give you your specific action items for this week, because I want this video to end with something you can actually implement immediately rather than just absorb as an interesting idea. First, calculate your essential monthly expenses honestly using only true necessities and multiply by 3 to find your minimum emergency fund target. Second, check whether your current emergency fund, if you have one, is sitting in an account earning anywhere close to the 4 to 5% available right now in mid-2026, or whether it is quietly losing value in a near-zero account at your primary bank. Third, if you are carrying any debt above 7 to 8% interest, make a plan this week to prioritize eliminating it before building further cash reserves. Fourth, once your emergency fund framework is clear, decide on a specific dry powder percentage, even if it starts small, and begin directing a portion of new contributions there instead of full market deployment every single month. None of these 4 steps require predicting the next crash. None of them require timing anything perfectly. They simply require the same quiet, methodical discipline that has defined Buffett's approach for 6 decades, scaled down to whatever size your own financial life actually requires right now. Be fearful when others are greedy. Be greedy when others are fearful. You cannot act on that principle with conviction if you have no cash reserve to act with in the first place. The fortress comes first. The opportunity comes after. And the patience required to build the fortress quietly, while markets feel calm and boring, is the exact same patience that eventually rewards you when everyone else is scrambling and you are simply, calmly ready. Subscribe for the next video, where we connect this fortress framework directly to specific portfolio rebalancing decisions for the current 2026 economic environment we have discussed throughout this channel. Let me also talk about something that most people skip entirely when they think about the fortress balance sheet, and that is the emotional cost of not having one during a genuine crisis. When you have no emergency fund and the market crashes at the same time that a real-life expense hits you, the decision you are forced to make is not a financial one. It is a survival one. And survival decisions made under extreme financial stress are almost never the same decisions you would make sitting calmly in a good month reviewing your options with a clear head. This is why the fortress does not just protect your investments. It protects the quality of your decision-making at the exact moment when good decisions matter most. Research by the American Psychological Association consistently shows that financial stress is one of the leading causes of impaired cognitive function, poor sleep, and reduced ability to think clearly about complex problems. The fortress balance sheet removes financial stress from your life not because it makes you rich overnight, but because it gives you the one thing that money anxiety destroys completely, which is time and space to think clearly. When you have 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting safely in a high-yield account, a market crash becomes an event you observe with curiosity rather than one you experience with panic. That psychological shift alone is worth more than any specific investment return I could point you toward in any particular year. Now, let me address one more thing before I give you your action items for this week, because I have seen this mistake made by otherwise financially intelligent people, and I want to name it clearly. Do not put your emergency fund into investments, even conservative ones, to try to earn a higher return. I have seen people put their emergency fund into short-term bond funds, balanced ETFs, or even dividend stocks because they felt keeping it in cash was too wasteful. The problem is that in March 2020, all of those instruments fell significantly in value at the exact moment when job losses and unexpected expenses were most likely to create an emergency. The emergency fund has exactly one job: to be there in full when you need it. Not mostly there. Not 80% there after a small market drop. Fully there, fully liquid, fully available, regardless of what every other financial market in the world happens to be doing that particular week. This is why a high-yield savings account is the right vehicle for this specific purpose, even if the return feels modest compared to what markets can theoretically offer over long periods of time. The return on your emergency fund is not measured in percentage points. It is measured in the decisions you never had to make under panic, the investments you never had to sell at the worst possible moment, and the calm you were able to maintain when everything around you felt uncertain. That is the real return on the fortress balance sheet,